Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai. Welcome back to the Power Podcast. Today I am joined by Judy O'Brien. So Judy is joining us from Whanganui Atara in Wellington. She is Head of Culture, Inclusion and Safeguarding for New Zealand Rugby. And it is an absolute pleasure to have you here with us today, Judy. Welcome.
Well, Jess, thanks very much for having me on the show.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm looking forward to getting stuck into our kōrero, learning a bit more about your journey, your story, and what you're up to now. And I guess it's a big question if I kind of just say, so tell us about yourself, tell us about your story. But where were the sort of, in terms of what you're doing now, when you look back, when did all that kind of start for you? When did you get the whole sort of, oh, yeah, this is what I want to do with my life. This is what I want to do in the world. Where did all that come from? And how did it relate back to your own experience?
Wow, yeah. I think from a young age, I was always really interested in inclusion and inclusive practices. I'm the eldest of 5 kids and a large extended family, grew up in a Catholic community. And so I was raised with these sort of Catholic values and a Catholic work ethic, which was all about service in the community. I lived with my grandparents for a while as a teenager and really picked up that ethos and that kaupapa from them about leadership through service. They were both pastoral care workers in the church. And I was not like most of the other people at church. And so I understood all of these great values from my family and from my community, and I also didn't feel super included in that environment myself. So I had to do a bit of soul searching and really understood from that sort of self-exploration work and education that we can make space for anyone in our workplaces, in our communities, if we can understand people and take the time to get familiar with people to build that understanding. So I didn't know exactly that this was the role I would end up in. I studied psychology and social policy through university, initially thinking that I wanted to do sort of one-to-one client work. And then as I studied social policy, I got really interested in how we can shift the way communities and society operate, how we can make things better for everyone through strategy. Yeah. And what was really driving me was gender equity at that time. So I had a fierce feminist single mother who raised me, and I was really interested in the barriers that existed in society and in workplaces to women's participation in all kinds of public spaces. And violence was a major barrier. So I got really interested in violence prevention, started my career working in the Ministry of Justice and violence prevention, and then moved into the community sector. So I spent a lot of my career working in kind of feminist spaces and partnering with mainstream spaces to implement programs and initiatives to help prevent harm and create more welcoming, inclusive cultures in workplaces and in communities. And then as I continued to do this work, like diversity and inclusion and equity and inclusion initiatives really started to look like more of a strengths-based approach to violence prevention. What are the things we do well in workplaces and communities? How can we shine a light on those, expand them, invest in them further, and make sure that we all have the opportunities and equal opportunity of outcome, not just access as well?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I ended up at New Zealand Rugby because I was familiar with some of the work that was happening within this organisation. When I saw the role advertised, I reached out to people that I knew. I understood that this was an organisation who was not just starting the journey, that this work really started for rugby back in 2016, and I came on board in 2022. I should know that.
Nice. Fabulous. In terms of your leadership journey to this point, what have been some of the biggest challenges? Because it's interesting, right? Each organisation brings with it its own opportunities and its own challenges. And I think particularly for those male-dominated spaces, those challenges can often increase for women and underrepresented groups, particularly if you're the only one that looks and sounds like you around the table. What have been some of the challenges in your leadership journey that you've had to overcome?
I think part of it is just, first of all, starting with myself and any self-limiting beliefs that I had. I'm a transgender woman. I genuinely did not see this career for myself 20 years ago, 10 years ago. And so challenging my own assumptions about what people accept and what people will make space for, so that I didn't have to feel like I was just there to carve out a space for myself, but shift my mindset to assume that that space was there for me already and that it was mine to take if I wanted to. So I had to sort of, shift my own mindset about that, not assume that I wasn't going to be welcome, assume that everyone's your friend, be the first person to break the ice. And that was, probably the first hurdle. And then understanding what people's actual motivations, individual motivations for being on board with this work are as well. So when you come into a male-dominated space and you are different to everybody else in the room, it can be easy to just assume that how people respond to you, if that's a different response you're expecting, is because of who you are. But if you're not thinking about what they're dealing with in that moment, you might write people off for the wrong reasons. So I spent a lot of time just trying to get to know people as individuals and understand where they were, understand their relationships and what motivates them to actually be an active ally in this space as well. How can we understand what's in it for them, whether that be emotional, whether that be a logical reason that this makes good business sense, or if that person is just focused on the bottom line. But in a lot of the spaces that I've worked in, there have been incredible, powerful women who absolutely dominate. So I don't like to talk about male-dominated spaces because there's some incredibly powerful women in pretty much every space that I've worked in. And I've worked across all sectors doing this kind of work, from the recycling centre down here, right at the coalface, through to corporate law firms, alternative music scenes around the country, screen industry. The dynamics are all kind of the same, regardless of the sector that you're in. And there is always an incredible champion who's willing to stand up for what they believe is right. And there's usually somebody who has weathered storms for decades and internalized some of that work, but is open to holding the door open for others as well.
Yeah, and that's so important, particularly in this current climate. The role of allies, regardless of gender, the role of allies is so important. And for those of us, and it's interesting you say that, because often it's those that have experienced challenges themselves that are more able to then appreciate the challenges of others. And like you say, hold the door open or just be a bit more mindful around the experiences of others. And we need so many more people like that. I'm interested in, the allyship that you've observed in your work and over your career, and how I guess we look for more of that. How do we encourage more allies into this space and open up the allyship space for it to be a space that everybody feels they can get involved in? Because like you say, allies are so important to all of our journeys.
Yeah, I think, gosh, the conversation about allyship has moved across the spectrum so significantly in the past few years. And what I would like for us to be able to do is build a beautifully connecting bridge across different parts of arguments around this space. I think at times it's really easy to alienate people who are in that movable middle, who want to be an ally but might not be aware of how to say the right thing or how to demonstrate that their motivations have integrity and that they're not just virtue signalling. And then they might make one wrong move and bam, cancel culture. Accountability is important, but jumping on people when they make the wrong move without demonstrating how they can do better and keeping the door open for them as well, I think we can lose a lot of people that way. So when we're looking at how people can move into allyship, we have to think about the space that we are creating for them to occupy, and make it make sense for them. So how can you make this simple? When I was doing some work around gender equity and inclusion in the building and construction industry, like the driving force there was still quite emotional for some people. There were men operating in these environments who wanted to believe that their daughter could show up and get a job on their site someday. And they didn't feel comfortable with some of the language that was being used on that site. And that was what made sense for that community and that group of men working there was, oh, well, if a woman was working here and she was my sister or my daughter or my cousin, no way would I speak the way that I'm speaking with these men. So if all I need to do is just think about how I'm speaking and shift my behavior, then that makes total sense to me. But if you're coming in here and telling me that I'm sexist and misogynistic because I'm using that language, then I'm going to entrench some of my more resistant attitudes and I'm not going to listen to you. Yeah. So just making it make sense for people, making it simple and easy, and reframing it for people, assuming that people want to do good and working from that basis.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. I mean, I've noticed in this mahi that it's the small things that make the biggest impact, and I think that makes it doable. And I think you're right, engaging everybody in the corridor has kind of been the key to unlocking this, but they have to find their why to be in the conversation in the first place. And I think, to your point, there is a lot of people that want to get involved in this space. They want to do the right thing. They want to be a good ally, but is it safe for them to do that? So am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to offend someone? Or am I going to be the one that ends up copping the backlash because I got it wrong? And so sometimes it's easier for me to be on the sidelines than it is to engage and be a good ally and stand up and intervene and all of that stuff. And I think as well, we've seen a little bit, particularly in this space, a little bit of us and them. You know, you're part of the problem rather than actually how do you become part of the solution. And so there's often been this division that gives rise to some of that defensive behavior rather than this unity around how do we, when we talk inclusion, how do we unite everyone around a common goal? Because most of us want a culture where everyone can belong and everybody is respected and everybody can do their best work. There's not many people that say no to that. But of course, we've seen the shift, particularly globally in the media, around the, we might call it clash around diversity, equity, and inclusion, or certainly a change in the conversation. And I'm interested in your thoughts around where to now for us in this work, because it feels like a bit of a watershed moment globally in terms of a rebrand. Are we talking about the same things? Are we losing traction? How do we talk in a way that engages everybody? So given you're involved in this work, what do you see as the next horizon for the inclusion journey, particularly here in Aotearoa?
Yeah, I guess the horizon is the same one that we were looking back to when we watched the sunset yesterday, in that we're not looking for a new idea. It's about maintaining the good progress that we have achieved at this point. And whether we need to revisit the language that we use to describe this stuff to make it more comfortable for people. I think that discomfort is a great driver of change and that's really important. But how long can people sit in the same kind of discomfort? So understanding why people might feel uncomfortable with words like diversity, equity, and inclusion, and translating that back into concepts that maybe feel more familiar to them, like respect. It comes back to having basic respect for people, and operational effectiveness, ensuring that in the workplace people have what they need to feel their best and do their best. And in our communities, it's about civility and progress and connection. And I think kindness is still an important part of that conversation too. A lot of the backlash that we do see, people might take one part of the conversation that doesn't sound too sort of regressive and use that as a mask for potentially some quite harmful or hateful views. And so I think we need to be mindful as well of when the resistance we're facing is actually just masking something more nefarious, or is this just somebody's confused and needs a bit of a helping hand and some guidance and a reminder of the why behind this. The majority of people are good people who just want to be welcoming and inclusive and do the right thing. And so I think the focus for this kind of work at the moment is, going back to what makes sense for people and why would this make sense for them to continue staying on board with that. I think issues like equity don't disappear. We still need to take targeted approaches to ensuring that we can achieve equality for all. I think accessibility makes sense for people. Of course, we want people to engage with our services, engage with our products, have access to what we're providing, and to do that in a way that makes sense for them, in a way that is culturally safe for them, in a way that meets their physical accessibility needs. I think inclusion never really goes out of fashion. I don't think bully culture is coming back in. So maintaining that focus on creating safe and healthy, appropriate workplaces is important. But also like giving people a bit of slack when they're making jokes and they want to explore the limits of what's acceptable. I try to make sure that we focus on having conversations about what is acceptable for everybody in that space. So we go, okay, in this workplace, in this community, in this office, we know that the shared line for humour is here, and we will sort of readdress that as we need to.
Yeah, it's such an important one, right? Because banter is such a massive part of our culture and how we connect as humans. And also there's a line.
Yeah, like banter can be used to excuse bullying and harassment. Yes. But if we all understand that we're all in on the joke, that's fine. But it's that inclusive element of it, right? How do you know that the joke is including everybody in the room? Did you seek consent first? What kind of research have you done just to gauge the environment that you're working in to make sure that everybody's okay in that space? I work with an incredibly diverse team with people of different religious backgrounds, ages, ethnicities, sexualities, and the kinds of jokes that I would crack with my friends, I would never say in the office with my colleagues. But I know that with my friend group, it's totally acceptable. So it's just about understanding how to do a bit of a risk assessment at a very
know your audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think to your point, that audience is changing as well in terms of our communities, but also our teams and the demographics. Aotearoa and the world is becoming more and more diverse. And when we look at demographic changes and extrapolate that out over the next 30 years, that's only going to change. So there is more diversity, not less. And so in terms of being able to bring everyone together in our teams to manage that, and like you said, the issues don't change in terms of inclusion and respect and wanting a culture where everyone can thrive, regardless of what language we use. That's always going to be the aim of an organization, of a leadership team, and of a culture. And I'm interested in, when you think about, because you're so involved in this space, your legacy and what you see in the future with this space, how we move through, navigate the current landscape, shall we say, with building inclusivity into this, not as something we do on the side or as a nice to have or a project, but just the way things are. Particularly with those changing demographics. What do you see as the future and hopefully kind of your role in that from a legacy perspective?
Yeah, I would like to see this work continue to be considered essential to good management, good operations. So it's not a nice to have a team who are highly engaged. It's not a nice to have to ensure that the way that you are communicating to your market is responsive to the cultural standards and the expectations of that market. If you're engaging with Asian communities, Pacific communities, I would like to see, at a really basic level, engagement with those communities that you seek to serve or include as one of the first steps in your planning and decision-making process. If we can embed that kind of co-design into everything that we do, then I think that that would be really successful for the future of this work. I think if we can get to a point where it's just assumed that men and women and gender minorities all have an equal opportunity to get the right job for them, to succeed in that job and to be supported in that role, then that would be success for me. That we have the systems, policies and processes in place to ensure that that work is future-proofed regardless of changes in leadership and regardless of changes in governments or funding structures. We know that these things make good business sense. And so coming back to that operational effectiveness, optimizing your workforce, if we can maintain a focus on people's wellness and well-being when they are in our care and contracted by us or when we're communicating with their communities, then that would be the kind of legacy that I want to see, that this work is just embedded and woven into the core, and that eventually roles that are specific to this work are almost unnecessary, that it just becomes how we engage by default. But that doesn't just happen. It takes intentional leadership, continued investment, ongoing development, training, education, and open conversation where people feel safe to ask why this is important, to build their own understanding, and to get familiar with people just through basic curiosity.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I love throughout this conversation, Judy, and just throughout the work that you do, full stop, your ability to remain hopeful, optimistic, to have kindness rooted at the center of what you do, and to give people the benefit of the doubt when I'm sure there have been many instances where that's been a challenge and you've perhaps not always been afforded the same kindness that you give to others. How do you stay optimistic, particularly with the world as it is and the mahi that you're involved in? How do you stay hopeful, optimistic, and kind towards others, and just well in yourself when you're battling what you're battling and you're kind of, carrying the flag and doing the mahi in this space? What are some of your secrets? Because I think there's a few people out there in the world at the moment that either tend towards, how do I stay optimistic when things are like they are, or how do I remain kind to others when they are giving so much hatred to those that I love? What are some of your top tips? Because clearly you do this well.
I mean, I think I do it well most of the time, but absolutely I have my days where I just wake up and I'm like, wow, really? Really? Are we here again? But I've lived through a lot, I've been who I am for a long time now, and things have definitely been worse. And so I try to think about, okay, well, what is the progress that we have achieved? Let's just reflect on where things have been. What are the gains that we've made? I mean, just speaking from the perspective of a transgender woman, I have female on my birth certificate and my passport. I'm engaged to a beautiful man. These are things that I just, would not have seen for myself like 15 years ago. So I try to just focus on those positive things. Community is essential. If I'm feeling a little bit lost sometimes, then I know that there's awesome people out there who are also doing work like this that I can reach out to and say, hey, I'm kind of struggling right now to reframe things for myself. Can you tell me about what you're working on or how you're getting through this? And just being vulnerable with others and working through things together. I have a really great network of amazing friends who might not always be as diplomatic as I am. And so sometimes just hearing them voice more extreme opinions helps me find my place in the spectrum of ideas as well. It's like, no, yeah. I know where my part of this conversation is. And if we want to get to the real pointy end of it, my grandmother was a child refugee. She was a Holocaust survivor. She lost her entire family, murdered by Nazis in World War II. And when I think of her and her legacy, that's something that I aspire to. She was somebody who lost everything, converted to Catholicism when she married my grandfather, served her church and her community for a really long time, for decades, and just had this incredible resilience about her. And so if I'm really feeling like I'm challenged by something, I just think of Grandma and what would Grandma do, and follow that path.
Fabulous. Judy, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your story, your wisdom with us today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show. Now, if anybody is wanting to know what you're up to, how do they find you? How do they get in touch? Where is the best place to send them?
Oh, you can find me on LinkedIn with everybody else, Judy O'Brien right there, and I'd be very happy to receive a message or a friend.
Fabulous. We will pop the link to your LinkedIn on the show notes, but it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time being on the show today.
Thanks so much, Jess, for having me.